Diddy adopted a white child.
Tried to sacrifice me, but I ran away from there.
Because I am a great father, but I'm sleeping with the...
Why did one of music's biggest mogul adopt a white girl? The courtroom silence was deafening as she took the stand, ready to reveal secrets that could destroy his empire. What started as a mysterious adoption story is now unraveling into allegations of shocking motivations, and you won't believe what she had to say about those infamous parties.
My name's Ava. I'm a Scorpio.
No. What's your last name?
Oh, Ava Combs.
What's your other last name?
Ava Baroni.
Eva Baroni Combs. Diddy adopted a white child. I want you to tell them the story about how I adopted you. But you still have beautiful parents.
And he saw me and decided to pick me up and said to come inside and play with the kids.
Yeah.
The story begins far from mansions and private jets in the quiet suburban life of a young girl who couldn't have been more removed from Diddy's lavish world. Her name, which remained largely unknown at the time, became the center of whispered intrigue. When her path crossed with one of the most influential figures in music, she was just another face in the crowd, at first young, quiet, and seemingly ordinary. But the circumstances that brought her into Diddy's orbit would later spark heated debates about power, privilege, and hidden motivations. It is at an event that catered to the elite where she first caught his attention. Accounts differ on how exactly this interaction happened. Some say she worked behind the scenes, helping out as an assistant to a lesser-known industry name. Others suggest she had simply been invited along as a guest of someone else, blending into the background among the glitz and glamour. What stood out, however, is how quickly she became an object of curiosity. Those close to the event started noticing how she ended up in corners of conversations, with Diddy maintaining a much quieter demeanor than those clamoring for his attention. It wasn't just that she was out of place, it was the way she seemed to capture his interest in a room full of more obvious candidates.
Diddy presented me in front of his friends. I was very scared. He tried to sacrifice me, but I ran away from there.
What is a freak off? The freak off essentially was something that Cassie said she learned about through Sean Combs about a year into their relationship. He described it as voyeurism.
He had everything to do with what she was wearing. She said she would buy outfits from sex shops and see which one he wanted her to wear. And then inside the actual hotel rooms, their apartments where the freak-offs took place, she said that Combs was in charge of lighting. It began with candles. It then moved to studio lighting.
They might say she's lying, but that's going to be a little hard to do with that video.
What made this budding connection so startling was the contrast of worlds she represented. None of the excess. Diddy surrounded himself with no celebrity lineage, no high-profile social presence, no dramatic style to stand out. Old interviews from unnamed event organizers and insiders describe her as vulnerable, a word that seemed to explain both her presence among the powerful and why someone like Diddy might single her out. But even then, no one could have foreseen what happened next, her life being upended by illegal adoption. When Diddy announced the adoption, it immediately drew questions. For someone so deeply embedded in a media world that thrives on appearances, the lack of explanation made it even more confounding. He framed his decision as a gesture of care, citing personal convictions and a desire to provide her with better opportunities. But a decision of this magnitude, adopting a young white girl into a world of intense celebrity scrutiny, was never going to fly under the radar. If anything, it only made people ask more questions. Why her? Why now? These were questions Diddy seemed to deliberately sidestep, adding to the growing speculation. Rumors began swirling almost instantly. Some media outlets hinted at the possibility that his interest in her stemmed from guilt tied to someone in her past. Other theories suggested it was a PR move, an attempt to soften his image at a point in his career where he needed to stay relevant. But one story often repeated among insiders involved her innocence, a supposed foil to Diddy's reputation for extravagance and hedonism. There was an unsettling suggestion that her demeanor, her stark difference from the world of fame, was not a shield from it, but rather a lure. The conversations, however, were always drowned out by Diddy's insistence that it was nothing more than an act of altruism. He had the means, he argued, and she needed the chance, a new path that only someone like him could provide. At the gap between his explanation and the reality of their unlikely connection continued to raise doubts, and as more layers of this story were pulled back, the adoption was starting to look less like an act of kindness and more like the setup to a mystery far darker than anyone imagined.
Step to the side. Step to the side, please.
You look cold. You got smiling. How are you guys feeling? How do you feel today?
Step to the side, please.
Watch out, watch out. Watch your butt.
Big great. How can you walk today? Congratulations at NYU, Chad. Give us a little space. Give us a little space. Give us a little space. combination. Nice little just smile. Nice. That's step to the side, please. You look at this guy being by his very stuff. Yeah, wait. Keep a little space. Watch out. Just a little space, please. Oh, my. Sorry about that. It's all right. Keep just a little space. Yeah. Oh, chuck it in again. Guys, oh. I'm going to bust them down. When you guys, it's burning it. Back up. Sorry, back up. She like, got a white was right out of the issue. It's possible to knock. Hey, man, Sean, man, be good, bro.
The announcement landed with little warning. Sean Diddy Combs, a man known for his larger-than-life presence in music and business, revealed to the world that he had adopted a teenage girl who seemed entirely removed from the life he had built. In interviews and public statements, Diddy framed the decision with a sense of purpose. He referred to her upbringing as difficult and claimed that he simply wanted to give her a better life. But even as he projected compassion, the abruptness of the announcement left people questioning how a girl from such a drastically different background had suddenly become his daughter. At first glance, the adoption seemed almost random. She wasn't someone with public ties to Diddy or his orbit. There was no prior connection known to the public, no signs that they had any shared story before this sudden relationship. Diddy's public explanation was vague, to say the least. He asked the media to respect her privacy and spoke only in broad terms about opening her up to new opportunities. But the absence of detail only fueled speculation. Why this young girl, who looked more like a stranger next door than a new member of hip-hop royalty, been taken in under such mysterious circumstances? The public reactions were curious, uncomfortable, and heavily divided. Some praised Diddy for acting selflessly, suggesting that his decision highlighted a side of him that people rarely saw. Others doubted the sincerity of his intentions, calling the move performative or part of some ulterior plan. Media outlets weren't shy about poking at the gaps in his story. Other articles surfaced questioning how the adoption had been expedited, with whispers floating around about possible favors pulled to streamline the process. Legal experts weighed in, noting that high-profile adoptions often invited scrutiny, especially when they appeared rushed behind closed doors.
The prosecution's star witness taking the stand, but it was more than that. It was how Cassie took that stand. You could hear a pin drop when those doors opened, and a visibly pregnant Cassie Ventura walking past a man she had not seen in 6.5 years. A man she says violently abused her for a decade. A man the prosecution said trafficked her. Well, she sat across from him, placed her overcoat behind her, turning her body slightly toward the jury, rubbing her pregnant belly throughout her testimony. Diddy, well, he was more fidgety than he was the day before. He was passing notes. He pushed himself away from the defense table and largely sat like that. They never seemed to make eye contact with one another, not even after she was crying about having loved him once and planning and participating in these freak-off sex parties because she feared him and she wanted to make him happy, but feeling worthless, feeling disgusting because she didn't want to do it. Now, with each moment, the testimony became more and more graphic. Her delivery, though, it never changed. It was matter of fact, steady, calm. At times, she was even critical of herself, walking us all through how a 10-album record deal came over a 10-year period of abuse and sexual humiliation.
Is he running an entertainment and fashion industry, or is he running essentially a criminal organization?
By the way, we have a poll up right now. You can participate in it. Do you think Cassie Ventura was a victim or partner in this? Ready for this? 82%. Well, this doesn't make sense. 82% say yes. I don't know if that's yes to, I think we need clarification. 82% say victim or partner. We'll get a clarification on that.
By the way,
right now.
But that's my answer to that question.
Oh, okay. 82% say victim. 82% say victim. Maybe based on we're reporting on the testimony right now.
Yeah. I mean, I think she is a victim if the allegations are true, but also she is involved in some of the criminal act. I mean, she's getting those prostitutes, right? She's making payments to them, allegedly. She's having them come. So she's involved in some of the alleged criminal activity. And that's an interesting point that wouldn't just apply to her. Other people in his orbit might be some combination of victim and co-conspirator.
But you know what? That video changes everything, because the argument would be, What do you think happens if she says no?
Yeah.
What do you think happens if she says, I'm not in the mood for a freak off tonight. I'm not going to pay the dancer. That's what's going to happen. That video is arguably the most important piece of evidence because it sets the stage when we're talking about coercion or fraud or force. Question from Angelina. How old was Cassie when they first started dating? I think she was 19 years old. So you're talking about a 17-year age difference. That's important. I think that's an important factor if you're talking about power and control, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The fact that he's older and obviously has much more power anyway.
Sherry Williams asks, what kind of time is Diddy facing if he's found guilty?
The whispers were louder. Industry insiders and those supposedly familiar with Diddy's inner circle began circulating alarming theories. There were comments about how this girl's presence was strikingly at odds with the usual narratives that surrounded him: extravagance, glamour, and raw ambition. Unlike others who had gravitated toward Diddy for fame or fortune, she had no connection to that world. Speculation bubbled beneath the surface about whether her sudden entry into his life served a purpose far more complicated than Diddy let on. Despite these growing rumblings, Diddy maintained his stance. He told anyone who would listen that it was about guidance, helping a child escape from a hard past to have a brighter future. Yet even as those words seemed noble, they left a trail of uncertainty. The media continued to dig, finding no satisfying answers about the adoption's timing, its speed, or its underlying motivation. Each flimsy remark he gave only pointed to something deeper, something untold. If his reasons were as straightforward as he claimed, why didn't they hold up under scrutiny? Perhaps more importantly, was there something about this adoption that even Diddy himself didn't want to admit? The revelations to come would suggest that this wasn't simply a case of a selfless act. It was the beginning of a puzzle tied to his private life in ways no one expected.
You see how Albie Shore, he came out saying that Kim Porter death needs to be looked into?
I think that Al being his ex-wife, he have every right, knowing about the stuff that came out about Diddy and what he was doing. You understand what he has done in the past, and people have overlooked it. By him coming out and saying that he hoped that he could get her case reopened. There was a guy called John the Paperwork Party. They would put in an open petition to get Kim's case reopened. You understand what I'm saying? So I'll be sure doing this is showing that, you know, he still got love for Quincy's mother. He still want to find out the truth because allegedly, Kim was fine the day before and the day of her death. And then now she found in the bed, dead from pneumonia. That just don't sound right, bro. That don't sound right at all.
So you feel the same way about her death being suspect?
I don't think nobody in America thinks nothing suspicious about Kim's death, bro. If you are rich like that, you could, you know, Kim had, I think a net worth of like, what, 12 million a year or something like that? Kim could have called any doctor to come over and look at her. If she was that bad, you know, she could have called an ambulance or something like that. Everything is suspicious about her death, bro. And I don't think an autopsy was done on her. And if it was a half job.
You personally, right? What do you think happened to Kim Porter?
If I say something personal, bro, and my belief, and I put it on to the public.
The rumors about Diddy's infamous freak-off parties had swirled for years, spoken about in hushed tones, and only hinted at in the media. These events, known for their exclusivity and secrecy, were said to attract some of the biggest names in entertainment, politics, and business. But the details of what went on behind closed doors were far less glamorous. Whispers of excess power dynamics and unsettling behavior followed these parties like a shadow. For a long time, it was all written off as industry gossip, the kind of speculation that surrounds any celebrity of Diddy's stature. But as the girl's story unfolded, these parties became impossible to ignore. Accounts from those who claimed to have attended painted an unsettling picture. Former associates and staff members described settings that were designed to impress and intimidate: lavish mansions.
Well, see, I know two situations like that. See, Cassie told the story on the witness stand about how Puff and her was in a freak off, and then D-Rock intervened or whatever like that, and they masked themselves up in all black, took the guns out the safe, and went to find Suge. You know what I'm saying? Suge even spoke about he glad they didn't find him because a whole lot of other people probably been dead then too, you know, if they would have found him. Now, she testified that, you know, Puff and D-Rock was going to try to, you know, unalive Suge. You know what I'm saying? Now, what I do know this, me and D-Rock had a conversation about why he's so close to Puff now. You understand? And he told me he was in a diner, Mel's Diner. I guess it was probably Mel's Diner. That's one of the diners that stay late open in California. He said that he was trapped in there and he ain't have no burners or nothing on him. He ain't have no guns, no nothing. He said he called Puff. Now, this is a story coming from D-Rock. He said he called Puff and Puff came there. But if Puff would have came in the diner, they would have known something. He didn't come to the diner. He sent Cassie in there with the burners. And Cassie gave D-Rock the gun in the diner. Now, this is coming from D-Rock. The story Cassie told is that it was a whole different story from what D-Rock had told me, because D-Rock said he was in the diner himself. And Puff came down there with the guns, sent Cassie in there and gave him one, and was outside waiting on him to come outside. So that's the story that I knew, and I had already said that and expressed that in one of my shows before. Now, the story Cassie told, it was like she saw D-Rock and Puff both put on black and went to go unalive Suge. So those are two different stories that I know of, you know, one from D-Rock and the one we heard from Cassie. It may be the same story and Cassie just flipped it some kind of way, because D-Rock told me this years ago. And then maybe Cassie just, you know, flipped it in a certain kind of way because she took the gun to D-Rock, according to D-Rock.
Were turned into temporary playgrounds for the powerful, complete with extravagant food live performances and carefully curated guest lists. Yet what stood out most were the rumors of what happened in the private rooms tucked away from the main event. That's where the term freak-off came into play. Allegations ranged from consensual adult activities to far murkier claims, with some suggesting that participants were pressured or manipulated into compromising situations. For years, these claims were brushed aside, dismissed as exaggerations or the bitter words of those no longer in Diddy's inner circle. But when the girl began to piece together details about these events, the connections to her own adoption started to emerge in ways that were hard to ignore, according to insiders who later spoke out. She had stumbled upon conversations and photographs that pointed to the darker side of these parties. It was unclear at first whether her discovery was accidental or something she sought out, but what she found deeply disturbed her, as her testimony would later suggest the timing of her adoption started to feel less coincidental. Sources close to the situation alleged that her presence in Diddy's life may have been tied to these gatherings in some capacity. It was her unassuming appearance, her vulnerability, or something even more calculated. Certain text exchanges and personal accounts hinted at in courtroom documents raised questions about whether bringing her into his inner circle was strategic.